much for coming here. This is a pretty amazing crowd for my little brother James Baldwin. Yeah, it's kind of bittersweet how we always have to hook up with each other this way. But I'll tell you what, Jimmy was a one-of-a-kind person. I'll start out at the beginning there about how I remember Jim and his whole life. I was 6.5, 7 years old. My parents were trying to have 6 children. We had 3 at the time, but the 4th one was Jimmy. My father got the mumps, so that put a little dent in the reproduction process. But my parents tried, and the doctor told them one day, I don't think you're going to be able to have any more children. Well, a month later, my mother goes, you know what, I know I'm pregnant. And so she went in and said, yeah, Nicole, you are pregnant for number 4. So here I am, and, 6.5, 7 years old, you kind of get a grip of what's going on, I had my brother Andy, who was a Apache Indian child. I had my sister, who was just a sweet bookworm, really kind soul, quiet, And then when Jimmy was born, boy, it took holy hell to my mom. Jimmy was born placenta previa, and almost my mom didn't make it through that. And still to this day, all my grandparents and all my mom's aunts and uncles came down to help out. And then one morning, my mother goes, uh-oh, something's not right. And she runs out the door with a towel between her legs, and she was bleeding pretty bad. My father grabbed her and said, we're going to the hospital, we can't wait for an ambulance. And at that time, my parents had a nice Mustang, a 67 Mustang. I'd never seen my father do a burnout out of the driveway as long as I remember, But at the same time, when Jimmy was being born, the man was going to land on the moon in 1969. And everybody was just, waiting to see what this was going to be like. And just this past year, I wish Jimmy 50 years later could have seen, the new crew of the Artemis go around the moon, because I was just a little kid when that happened. And so my mom was in the hospital for a while, and the funniest thing I remember about my mother's aunt, Rochelle, was my mother asked if the man landed on the moon, and my aunt said, they landed on the moon, he stepped off the ladder and went in the quicksand dust on the moon, and he disappeared. And my mother's like, oh my God, and all this stuff. But anyways, they were such a jovial family. So Jimmy came home, and my mother was busted up for a while, and so I actually learned how to change diapers and feed him and help out with my dad. My dad wasn't very good at those things, but he would help, and we started raising. But my mother couldn't have any more children, so Jimmy was saved the best for last, I guess. And so anyways, as Jimmy grew older, he was such a smart little boy. I mean, he was reading mathematics, doing everything at like 1.5, 2 years old, He could remember like VIN numbers from registrations, 12, 14-digit numbers, like there was nothing to him. As he got older, we all grew together. My brother Andy tortured him constantly, setting him up for my father, getting Jimmy in trouble, and then my father would finally figure out Andy was up to all the mess that he was doing to my father. But Jimmy was awfully close to my dad. If there was somebody that was just so similar, Jimmy was exactly the same humor, temperament, and wittiness as my dad. In 1975, my dad was diagnosed with heart disease. He had adolescent high blood pressure, and our doctor said to my father at 31 years old, you better do something with your life, because your heart is failing. You had an extremely enlarged heart, and you better get your things together. So my dad said, to hell with it. We packed our bags and we headed to Maine to open up a toy store on Main Street. And Jimmy loved it. I think Jimmy was 6 years old when we moved here. And Jimmy would help my dad with the shop and get inventory and hang out and just him and my father every Saturday. If my father didn't take Jimmy, he would throw a fit. And so Jimmy and my dad became really tight. In 1979, I was a sophomore in high school. My brother was a ninth grader, and my sister was an eighth grader, and Jimmy was in elementary school. One February night, my father's heart gave out, and that was the hardest part for Jimmy. It happened in our house, and it was an ice storm, and things were very good for. We knew, I had a feeling in my heart that that was the end of his life. But for Jimmy to actually see it, watch it go, was hard. So I became the dad. My mother was very nervous, and she was a stay-at-home mom, and we had to come together as a family. So Jimmy was the one that kind of got a little bit left behind. So anytime we had to do something, my brother Andy would still torture him, and I would be the one picking up the pieces. I remember getting a phone call from a Burger King one day. Andy and Jimmy went to Burger King, and Andy left them there. I'm like, Jesus. So one of the ladies said, Jimmy with his number, he said, this is the phone number, and thank God I was home. He goes, Andy left me here, I don't know what to do. I think he was like 8 or 9 years old. And, or maybe he was, 9 or 10 years old, something like that. So I went to pick him up, and he was kind of rattled, and I was pissed off at Andy. And so Jimmy and I started bonding a little bit more, and more and more. And when he went to high school, he had his friends, and they were all partiers and stuff. And his senior year, Jimmy was starting his problems with, alcohol and stuff. But the real tipping point was when his best friend, Jeff LaChapelle, was Jimmy's, go-to guy. Jeff was bigger than life, big teddy bear. Jimmy and him just clicked together, and Jeff passed away about 6 months after they graduated, and that just rocked Jimmy's world. And so Jimmy started his journey of, how do I deal with it? He started becoming an alcoholic at slow pace, and whereas he was drinking for 20 years, going couch to couch and hanging out, living with me, living with my sister, living with my brother. I probably took him to 20 halfway houses, and spent thousands of dollars and travel and the whole 9 yards, and I begged him and begged him. And when my brother Andy passed away, actually he lost a few more friends, a lot of island boys and a couple of island girls and just people that we all grew up with, We've lost a lot of that generation's kids in those eras of the 80s and the 90s, and it was very hard, very hard. I see a bunch of moms that have lost kids here, and you guys all know what it's like, But after my brother Andy died, he was really going over the edge, and I would call him. He would come over. He had like 4 OUIs under him. He couldn't drive. He had to hitchhike, take buses, and we helped him out for like the last time. He had an apartment in Westbrook, and I got a phone call saying that his landlord said, "Hey, you better get his furniture out of here, or else I'm keeping it." And it was all brand new furniture. Between my sister and I and my mom, we spent $6,000-7,000 that he only got to have for like 4 months. And So my best friend met her there, and I cleaned out his apartment and stacked it at my sister's house. Couldn't find Jimmy anywhere. And so anyways, I went back for one last load with garbage and stuff, and then I went home, and I was saying, Jesus, where the hell is he, you know? And that was the beginning of the cell phone era, but Jimmy had a hard time being employed and borrowing money from everybody and just couldn't hold on. So I went to throw the last bag of trash. I got my security deposit back, and I got all the furniture out of there. And lo and behold, I went behind the dumpster to throw the trash, and I see a sneaker and a leg there. And it was Jimmy, face down, drank a whole gallon of vodka, and he was barely breathing. So I said, oh shit. And I'm looking at him thinking he's dead, but he wasn't. So I picked him up, threw him over my shoulders. I was driving a company truck, and I had that thing freighted with dining room chairs and a bunch of stuff. And I went to the emergency room at Maine Med, like a banshee, because I knew he was pretty alcohol poisoned. And as I was going through the emergency room entrance, I cleaned out the emergency side, went all over the place, ruined a couple of dining room chairs, and I brought him in and I set him in there, and I said, I don't know, I just don't know. I've been spending years. And I left him there. I cried all the way home, and that was the beginning of Jimmy's turnaround. My mother called him, or Jimmy called my mother, and my mother said, don't call us anymore. We're done with you. We're so sick of being hurt and disappointed and not getting anywhere. You've got to do it on your own. And so we didn't hear from Jimmy for about a month. And next thing you know, we got a phone call, and he sounded pretty good. And he says, I'm working on it. 2 months went by, 4 months went by, 6 months went by, and he sounded better and better. And there was a little church on the Forsyth Road on Route 88 that he would go to. And those guys were awesome. And I would go there once in a while, you know. I remember going there for his first year of sobriety, celebrating that, and it just kept going. And Jimmy told me, he goes, man, that almost took a year to get those cravings out of me. He goes, I didn't realize how much I was drinking, but I did realize how much I was drinking. And then we got the 2-year pin, and Jimmy's like, well, you know what? I'd like to go back and get my diploma. 2 weeks before my higher graduation, Jimmy quit and never finished up his high school diploma. So he went to school, and he said, before I go to school, I probably should have some good-looking teeth. I called him, I go, Jimmy, you only have a toothbrush, not a teeth brush. And so I said, let's go to Aspen Dental. And we took a ride to Aspen Dental. And I said, all right, this is the beginning of your journey to straighten your ass out and make a difference in life, and for yourself, mostly for yourself. And so, me, I was struggling with my teeth. As Kim there, I got busted up when I was a kid, and I had been working on my teeth forever. And I went in there with Jimmy, and I said, well, your teeth are only going to cost you $6 grand. I got 120 grand in my mouth. And so he went in there, and they ended up pulling all the rest of his teeth out, and he got his plates in, and you should have seen him when he came out with his temporary plates. He couldn't stop crying. He goes, this is awesome. And I said, well, now you're going to start smiling again. Because Jimmy would hold a smile back, you know. And I said, well, this is the first step of getting better. So then he went back and got his GED and he smoked that with a 100% score. And then he looked at me and he goes, "I'd like to go to college." I said, "What are you going to do for college?" He goes, "I want to do computer science." And I said, "Where are you going to go?" And he goes, "I want to go CMCC." And I said, "What are you going to do for a job while you're going there?" And he goes, I'll have an apartment and then I'll start. So Jimmy had an apartment down in Portland, nice little place, nothing too big. And he started working at Chandler's Wharf, which is like a photomat shop on the, yeah. He started, I told you, it's going to be about a half hour. So anyways, I'll speed it up. So he started working at this place and it was like condos on the commercial street in Portland. And Jimmy started becoming the drunk driver, limousine person to pick the people up that were drinking, while Jimmy wasn't drinking, he had the night shift. And it was so funny, here he is doing his homework in a photomat booth with a parking lot thing, and you know, that little gate up and down, and I see Jimmy in there with his books and stuff. And anyways, then we had another bad thing. Jimmy, I had to tell Jimmy that Tia was diagnosed with AML leukemia. And Jimmy goes, "Oh shit." He goes, "Not again." And I said, "Yes, again, Jimmy. We're gonna have to have a wicked bad fight with this one." And so Jimmy got out of his apartment. We grabbed my mother from Canada. I sold my house. We all moved in together. And Tina's fight was that time. She went 8 months, fought it. Jimmy was so helpful, and he was going to college and working, and we all came to grips with each other. And it was great times, but sad times at the same time. With somebody diagnosed with cancer, when you have time, you use that time wisely. And we did. We had a lot of good times. And my sister, after 8 months, got totally rejected from her bone marrow transplant, and she passed away. And so that was the end of that. We had the celebration of life down in Maple Cove, and then my mom moved back to Canada, and me and Jimmy lived together. And me and Jimmy, I kept him on the road. He was doing extremely well, and he finally graduated from school. And then one of my best friends from high school, Chris Bunchon, hired him on as a camera door installer in security systems. And he started running with it. Well, at the same time, here I am dating my curly-headed bandit right over here. The one I liked in high school, but she thought I was too freaking crazy back then, so I had to wait 38 years. And she'd been single for 18 years, and it was a perfect get-together. I mellowed out a little bit, and she was less shy. Working in a grocery store, you gotta be less shy. So, Jimmy and I lived together for about 4 years, and got everything going, and Kim and I were getting pretty serious, and I said, "Oh, I'm gonna go to Ireland." I told Jimmy I was gonna go to Ireland and go to the top of Dunlow's Gap in Killarney, and ask her if I was, if I could marry her.
Jimmy, not us. Jimmy.
No, I know. I had to tell Jimmy. I had to tell Jimmy that. Jimmy goes, "Well, you know what? She's the only girl I thought would fit you the best, you know." He said, "Go for it. I can't wait to see what happens." I said, "I'm either flying home by myself or I'm gonna be back with her." So then all of a sudden, you know, I wanted to get married, and we had 2 houses. I had the Stanwood Street house where you almost got killed every morning trying to go to work. And then Kim had her little Snoopy house, which I would fit in there with my Hot Wheels collection. And I had dogs, and Kim was on the postage stamp. So I decided to sell the house, and we sold it with my other best friend, Fred Rowe. We did the triple play that year. That was kind of neat and scary at the same time. And I split the money with my mom and Jimmy and me. And I bought my house, and then Jimmy moved to Covey's Harbor, where he got an awesome apartment with Mike and Vicky Weber. And he had lived there ever since. And one thing about Jimmy, you know, he loved to take care of his people. You know, he spent the rest of his life. He said, I did so much in my drinking years, I got to pay it forward. And Jimmy paid it forward. He saved many, many friends, people, addiction, drugs, mostly alcohol was his specialty. But he always worked on it, worked on it, and worked on it. And the more he saved, the better and easier it was. And he didn't lose very many people, you know. I see a pile of people in here that he saved, you know. Some of her, you know, some just, they had that craving, they had that mental problem, and alcohol and drugs were the way to go. And Jimmy spent the rest of his time on his days off from not working, helping those people. Started clinics, started things that were just awesome. I remember going to the 10-year, 15-year, you know, celebration of sobriety, and if there was a phone call, he would be there in an instant. He used to have to say, Tom, I need to borrow $30 for gas so I can go visit these people and help them out. And I said, here you go. Do it. Don't blow it on anything else. And this past year, Jimmy, I told him a while ago, before his cancer diagnosis, I knew something wasn't quite right with his mouth. He was having a hard time with his plates, and I said, Jimmy, you gotta go in and get that looked at. But Jimmy didn't like doctors, and he procrastinated a lot. And a year ago, September, or about a year and a half ago, we went in and the diagnosis was bad that he had squamous carcinoma of the jawbone and tongue, and it was gone too long. And boy, did we cry together. And he goes, I don't want you to treat me. He says, you already seen enough. He goes, I have my friends that are going to treat me. And I think Matt Navy York, Chuck Richter, Sue O'Neill, and many other friends that gave Jimmy, you know, the care. But Jimmy said, no, I don't want you to see me this way. And I fought. I saw him. I didn't see him a lot. But we decided to have our coffees on Sunday and shoot the shit, just me and him. And he fought the fight. Man, that was a brutal beating. The last probably 2 months were the worst. And one good thing is I got my mom down last Christmas. And Jimmy was struggling pretty bad. The wounds in his mouth were huge. He could barely talk. He couldn't eat. He hadn't eaten in 8 months before that. I'm like, this is not quality of life, you know. And they wanted to take half his face off and his tracheotomy and all that. And he said, no way. And I said, Jimmy, you live the life you want. And just hang in there, but don't suffer. Please don't suffer. And he said, I won't suffer. He goes, when it's time, it's time. I said, let me know when it's time. Well, that New Year's Day, he came over to the house and he had a bib and he couldn't stop drooling and he could barely talk and we'd have to text each other. And, you know, he looked really frail and you know, his eyes looked so tired. But he talked to my mom and talked to me and talked to, you know, everybody. And then Jimmy said, I'll always love you guys. I said, I hope so. Give me a call later. And I called him and he says, yeah, it's getting pretty bad. And I said, well, hang in there. Give me a call in the morning. Well, about 4:30, 4:45, Matt York calls me up and says, hey, Tom, I just got a phone call from the hospital, and Jimmy is gone now. The old bastard there, he freaking jumped in his Jeep, 4 o'clock in the morning, drove himself to the hospital, and said, "I'm done with this," to the nurse. And 35 minutes later, he was gone. Then we got the phone calls from Matt and Vicky, and then the hospital. And we packed my mom in there. He went by himself. He didn't want us to see it, but we ended up going in and talking to the nurse, and she said he died very peacefully. He was having a hard time breathing, and he said that was the biggest fear for him. He didn't want to, not be able to breathe. And so Jimmy passed. I said, Jesus, what a way to pass, first day of freaking the year, And I said, well, he's starting a new year in heaven. So I said, and you know what? I could have just imagined, I think this group is going to be like tiny compared to the ones that are up there with open arms for him, And he gets to see all my brothers and sisters, his father, my grandparents, all my relatives, and especially all of his best friends from the time he came here to the time he left the planet. But I was so proud of him, so proud of him. The hardest thing is I cleaned out his apartment. He never left anything. He kept a lot in closure, I didn't get his computer passwords. He had so many pictures and stuff, so I'm working on that now with a guy. And I gave away his stuff to the people that needed it, I kept all the things that were me and him. And here I am. 5 months later, I wanted to be a good day, but hey, at least it's not snowing, right? It's not yet. Yeah. And while Jimmy got snow today, I found my sugar over there. Thanks, Chuck. That was a perfect spot for him today. He's freezing his ass off up there. But Jimmy so loves you all, Whenever you saw him, he looked good. He loved each and one of you dearly. And, all you guys all the moms out there were Jimmy's moms. All the dads out there were Jimmy's dads. Jimmy had so many friends and put so much love, as my mother shows. And Mom, you are one tough mama.